There's an enemy being fabricated in entertainment at the moment, and that enemy is canon. Now, this article is the intellectual equivalent of vomiting on your own shoes, but it does provide a great summary of various different arguments we've seen from people in the past, no matter how little they make sense. For instance, she even argues that we want stories to make sense, to have consistent internal logic, while simultaneously saying that it does restrict storytelling, and so we should just get rid of universes that make sense, because it would be a lot more fun. Saying that if you love an IP, you should set it free and get rid of the canon. Now, this is obvious BS, because an IP is its canon. Without that canon and background and story or universe, you don't have an IP to begin with, you've just got a load of places and names. You no longer have a world or a universe anymore. You've just got a brand. And they'll use that brand to stamp it on any old crap. That's what we've seen in modern times. I'm not surprised, though, that her arguments don't make sense, because neither does her end quote. If you love something, you should set it free. Pets? Your kids? Your wife? No, dear, I think you can keep that one to yourself. But this is a debate that's been raging across entertainment, and you find out one thing very quickly. It's not about the entertainment or the fans. It's all about them. When they say it's going to be fun, they don't mean for you. They mean for them to write. And the writer of this article did think that the season finale of Rings of Power was absolutely incredible, so, you know, it's not really the best judgment in most things. But in just recent times alone, when it comes to writers hating canon, obviously, The Witcher is a great example, where one of the people that worked on it said, with The Witcher, some of the writers were not or actively disliked the books and games, even actively mocking the source material. It's a recipe for disaster and bad morale. Fandom is a litmus test for checking egos. You have to respect the work before you're allowed to add to its legacy. And that's where the opinions differ. Are you adding to its legacy, or is its legacy holding you back because you want to have fun? Because that's certainly a narrative that's held by Andrew Stanton of Obi-Wan Kenobi, who said sometimes he was frustrated by the series story needing to adhere to the Star Wars canon. Fandom checks egos because you have to realize there's something bigger than yourself. There's something out there that somebody else made which you don't have the right to alter. This is something that was created by someone who's better than you are, because by definition, you're working on their project. The fact that an IP has lasted long enough and grown big enough to have another person working on it besides its creator means there's something about it of value which should be preserved. Otherwise, it wouldn't exist, no one would be a fan of it, and you wouldn't be working on it in the first place. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. But that's not the attitude of good old Andrew Stanton here, who fails the ego check. Andrew Stanton helped write the 5th and 6th chapters, but took some issue with the limitations of having to adhere to canon. As someone who directed Finding Nemo, and I think we can all understand his ego when he's famous for directing an animated fish, got annoyed because he'd write something and had to ask, does it fit in with canon? That maybe if I could venture beyond canon, I could tell a better story. It really does handicap better narrative options. This is a person that helped write Kenobi, who thinks he knows anything about narrative decisions. Oh yes, if only I could take the universe and make it not make any sense, it would be way better. That's just common sense. I kept trying to thread the needle so that the story wouldn't suffer, but we could please all the people that were trying to keep it in canon. And I don't know if you noticed what he did there. He immediately came up with two distinct options. You either had keeping with the canon and making it make sense, or a good story. At no point did he even consider that you can actually make a good story within canon. No, it was about threading the needle, where there's canon on one side and the story not suffering on the other one. So massive is the ego that unless he has entirely unrestrained creativity, then the story will suffer by definition, because he didn't create all of it. In its 45 years, many creators have found it limiting, having to stay true to a certain style or specific continuity, and keeping that continuity comes at the expense of creative liberty from some of the top talent in the industry. If you were top talent, you'd have your own IP, you'd be able to create your own things where you would have that freedom, but you haven't. Which is why you're playing in somebody else's playground. You need their name, their legacy, the respect that comes with their brand, because you can't make one of your own. And this isn't the first time for ego within Star Wars. When it came to Andor, they even said that the canon, you know, what you've been told, what you've been telling each other is actually wrong. They went back to do a prequel specifically so they could go against the canon and change it, because they don't respect the canon or the continuity. They just want to find some kind of loophole to work around it. And that's what prequels are. Third-party prequels, and by that I mean ones which aren't made in combination with the creator, are parasitic organisms. It's a way for a writer to simultaneously find a loophole to contradict the canon. Oh no, so you see, you thought you knew this, but it's actually wrong. This is how it was done. I created it. It gives them the freedom to come up with an explanation and tie themselves into the legacy of something that's greater than themselves. They want to take the credit without doing any of the work or having any of the talent. I know there are arguments that the mystery of something is actually better than the explanation, but I think that's simply because all the people that want to go back and give explanations in prequels are always the lowest quality of people, because everyone else wants to build on something that's already there, not go back and tie themselves into a place that they don't deserve. A sequel requires the talent to build something creative and original, whereas a prequel just requires you to deconstruct, and deconstructing is always far easier than building. And they know that breaking canon is purely for them and not the fans. That's why when something goes wrong, like Rings of Power, suddenly Season 2 will be far more canonical. It will definitely more closely follow Tolkien's lore, even going so far as Ishmael that plays Arendar, the original character in Rings of Power, saying, I have very few details about who's coming back or not coming back. It's an open-ended question because I don't have that much information, but if I do come back, I'll definitely feel more centered and grounded in what Arendar is and much more attached to him. Look, if you just let me in Season 2, it'll be far better, I promise. Which is a stark contrast to what he said in other interviews, where he talks about the requirement to recalibrate, break form, reshape, and make history from Tolkien's work. Oh, trust us, Season 2 is going to be far more canonical, and that's why we want to break form and reshape it into something new. Just like canon, they don't actually care if what they say makes sense. It's just whatever they think they can tell you in order for you to swallow it, even if they have to use other tactics to get you to accept the destruction of canon, such as just rampant insults and shame. Don't you know, fans don't know best. Knowing the source material doesn't make you a skilled showrunner, and being a skilled showrunner that doesn't know the source material means you will inevitably make trash. Because even if you do make a great, entertaining series of The Witcher, it will still be a terrible Witcher series. Just like I could accept that Daniel Craig had made a good action film, it was still a terrible Bond film. But this article quickly goes into a tailspin where it says the problem with The Witcher had nothing to do with whether the showrunners were a fan of the source material or not. It came down to the fact that they poorly translated that material to the screen effectively. Yes, because it wasn't a Witcher TV series. It kept trying to shove in side characters that they thought were more important. When people talk about canon, they don't just mean logical points A, B, and C. They mean something has to fit thematically within the universe itself. And that means in a Witcher series, you should be following The Witcher. Honestly, it still amazes me that I have to say that out loud. But then we get down to the worst obsessives at all, Star Wars fans, where they have the massive big brain take of going that Star Wars is actually trash now because people wanted it to stick to the canon. Yes, Star Wars is actually trash because Disney is trying to appease the fans and give them exactly what they're asking for. That's why Rise of Skywalker and Obi-Wan Kenobi exist. It's not that they were created by people who have the personality of roadkill, no. They were just giving you what you wanted. Are you not happy? How could you not realize that Kenobi is what you wanted all along, apparently? In attempting to appease the fans, Disney has produced works that are merely offensive for their lack of quality, which to me seems like it's a problem with the creators, not the fans. Kenobi didn't even make sense within its own story, let alone when you start tying it to the rest of the universe. But the corporate entertainment media only really has a few cards to play, and so they just use them for everything. It's copy and paste. So if we don't like canon and want to get rid of it, then we'll either just call you bigots and say that's why it needs to be destroyed because it was wrong and evil and had to be fixed. It's my moral imperative to destroy it. Or they'll say it's the fans' fault. Actually, it's the fans' fault why all the content that they hate is crap. Either way, it means we need to destroy every single IP out there, deconstruct it, and rebuild it in this new, refreshed image. And we're doing it for your own good. That's one of the main thrusts of the Esquire article. The rampant hatred of fans is front-loaded for multiple paragraphs. We're living through an age of interconnected storytelling, with sequels and prequels exploding across film, because the creatives are so bankrupt they don't have the talent to think of anything new, and all the corporations themselves waste so much money that they don't want to spend it on anything that could be a risk. But no, it's the fans' fault. These mega franchises are tormented by their fans through toxicity and targeted campaigns, among other odious tactics. If you didn't get the stench of supposed superiority just radiating off the page, well, I think the end of that sentence will give it to you. Toxic fandom is a complex beast, but the one sore spot is the concept of canon. Canon is scripture and king, but where does it start and stop? And that's easy. It starts where the story starts, and it ends where it ends. This isn't a complex idea. It's a timeline of events and sequences and facts. It's a world. It's history. And I know that you might like to go back and change history because it doesn't actually live up to your current ideals, but just like in the real world, you can't change factual reality, and these are the facts of the fantasy world. So who gets to decide? Well, the author did when he wrote it down. When new entries subvert or retcon the established universe, or as I prefer to say, they get it wrong. Oh, retcon this. No, you didn't. You just got your facts wrong. No, I've changed it. No, you haven't. When storytellers expand the canon, the backlash is swift and vociferous, which links to a Rise of Skywalker argument, so she really is building upon a foundation of sand here. People were angry because the sequel sucked. As they were sequels, they went off into the future. They were the ones expanding the canon into an unknown place. If they were actually good, people wouldn't have had complaints. Now, prequels, or ones set in an established time period, that's where canon matters more, because you've got it to fit in with the events of the world around you. Canon is a collective orthodoxy and a personal totem, inflected with each viewer's biases and desires. No, canon is canon. It's objective. It's history. Now, our history, you could debate on, it's only as accurate as the people that wrote it down. But when it comes to a movie, we see it on the screen. A book is written down in text. It's factual. It's objective. It cannot be changed. And that means your little slurs don't work here, darling. The problem with canon is the call is coming from inside the house. Storytellers are held hostage by their own audiences. Firstly, they have every right to, because they're the people you need money off. They're the people who put you in a job. They're the people that everything you do is for. So yes, you should be trying to please them. But secondly, they're not asking much. They're just asking for you not to contradict what has already happened in the universe. And if you can't, if that's beyond your skills, if you're such a hack, so talentless, so creatively bankrupt, that you can't even stay within the rules of a universe, which isn't very limiting actually, because you despise the original universe itself, you hate it and think it needs to be fixed, then you can just piss off. But this undermines their ability to do what artists do: explore, revise, and play. We're not here for your entertainment. I do not care if the scriptwriter had fun when he made a new movie. I do care if the movie's good. That's it. I'm giving you the money. Now dance, clown, dance. You're here to make a quality piece of entertainment. Your fun is entirely incidental. When you work in someone else's universe, because it's an ego check, there's one thing you have to bear in mind. It's not about you. A longtime Star Trek writer who later rebooted Battlestar Galactica said, "It's frustrating to be in the writer's room tossing out stories and then have to stop yourself and go, does this work? Does this violate continuity? I'm so sorry that you were in a writer's room tossing out absolute crap that wasn't even logically consistent, and you had to stop and think whether it would actually be good enough to serve the customer who's paying for it. Oh, if only I could go to a restaurant and be a chef who just burns all the food and go, yeah, well, you know, is this good enough to give the customers? Oh, why do we even have to consider that? Won't they just eat any old muck? I'm sorry that your customer base deigns to have something as insufferable as standards. You have to call people and check to whether it makes any sense. The Trek universe has got to such a point where you can't play anymore. And if you can't play anymore, it's because your muse has died up. Your ability to tell stories has gone. That's fine. Everyone runs out of ideas eventually. But if you can't even think of a story in Star Trek and the massive universe that is, with everything that it's got going for it, that you can build upon, then maybe it's time to put the typewriter back in the box and just go out to pasture. Because you've already got a massive, detailed universe that you can play in. You can't even do anything with that. How can storytellers possibly play or progress under the weight of all that baggage, otherwise known as story? I don't know, how do you continue your life when you've just got so much baggage behind you, so much history, so many days on the planet? I don't know about anyone else, but I just do something new with the next one. Build upon the foundation that came before. Be a little bit better tomorrow than you are today. How can you please today's demanding audiences? How about you build on the foundations of ideas of people that came before you, who built something that you couldn't? If fans won't accept stories that don't make any sense, then the shows will bring the canon to try and make it make more. And I still say, that sentence isn't English, but she goes on to talk about Strange New Worlds and the prequel, which simply tries to tie itself into Star Trek Legacy. This was a show that desperately wanted to appear as if it was Star Trek, even though it wasn't, and tie itself into the history of Star Trek in order to transfer the emotional love that one may have from one to another. Meanwhile, They were destroying all of it. They absolutely annihilated Spock in that show. It was disgusting what they did to him. But she thinks that was the best part. The fact that it enhanced Spock's backstory. Our goal was never to undo people's experience with the original series, but perhaps provide an interesting perspective to consider. A perspective that was deliberately twisted to put modern ideals into the past. They talk about subverting expectations, but this was an attempt to shine a different light onto what people already loved, even though that light came from the burning corpses of modernity. That show turned Spock into an emotional wreck, and had everyone just telling him how emotions were his strength. Yes, how Vulcan. She even has the nerve to say that this is what Rings of Power did, where they were following something where the source material is narratively thin. The Rings of Power showrunners grafted their own connective tissue onto the scaffolding. We want to tie ourselves into somebody else's legacy because we're too talentless to create our own. I don't think it's any surprise that an ideology based around uplifting weakness has led to a point where people are simply trying to tie themselves onto people greater than themselves. Why? They deserve it, I guess, because they think it's their right. If only someone had given me the opportunity, then I could obviously have done that. But everyone else in the world that achieves something, they just have such great privilege. And that means that I belong next to them. We just need something that levels us all out. So if I force myself into his legacy, then I'm not a parasite. I'm just equal. Because, you know, if you actually care about canon or where Gandalf was at what time during Lord of the Rings, you're just a persnickety purist. If you want logical consistency, then you're just a bad storyteller. Because a good storyteller would see a tantalizing mystery. Yes. There's no true Scotsman around here. Because if you disagree with the author, then you're just not a good storyteller. No. You're probably just a fan that doesn't know anything. And at the end of the day, the fact that IPs are being destroyed by corporations is not because the corporations don't have any soul. No. In fact, the corporations are probably saving the canon. We can't expect soulless corporations to tear up the rulebook, no. What we need are people that offer a roadmap to no longer be straitjacketed. Yeah, we can have one version of Trek and leave that there, but you know, instead of contradicting the canon of one Trek, why not just have version 2 Trek? Let's get a different Enterprise and tell a different version of those events. A lot like Wheel of Time, where they had an entirely written series for them, and thought, yeah, let's set fire to that, that'll heat us up in the winter. Let's take the names and the places, and then just do something entirely different. It doesn't matter that's not Wheel of Time, because what Wheel of Time is was literally written down in a book. No, this is now ours. I've taken the brand and I've stamped it on my work. The reason these IPs don't feel like The Witcher or Star Trek are because they're not. It's an entirely second version of it. What these are the original IPs that the writers would have made. It's them having fun with brand stamped on it. That's why they're trash, because they're not good enough to have stood on their own. Because if they would, obviously these corporations would have made their own IPs, because they would have had all the rights and all the ability to have all of the money. They wouldn't have been straitjacketed by canon. They could have done anything. But these people know they're awful. Deep down, they know they're not equal to people like Tolkien. They know they don't deserve to stand next to Tolkien, because if they thought they did, they wouldn't try to tie themselves into his shadow. Sequels have to stand on their own. They move into the future. They build upon the foundation of what came before, but they can kind of go anywhere. They're moving into a new form of events. Whereas prequels are parasites. They simultaneously hate the canon, despise that they have to stick to it, but are desperately trying to use it. That's why articles like this exist. They don't actually have a problem with canon. They don't actually think that things not making sense are good. They just don't like that they have to be that way. They don't like that it makes sense. They don't like that the argument is so obviously one-sided, as that anyone arguing against canon is innately wrong. The moment you argue that a story doesn't have to make sense, you've lost. They don't argue against canon because they think it's the right thing to do. They argue it because of how it makes them feel. Inadequate, because it shows them the mirror of themselves. The fans keep showing them the mirror of themselves, that these movies or books were actually good. This is the standard. This is what you have to live up to. And they know they can't. And so instead of being the ego check of accepting that actually, yeah, I should probably do something better because I'm just not very good at this. No. Instead, it's everyone else's fault. It couldn't be me. Look where I am. I'm a writer in Hollywood. Obviously, I can't be at fault. It must be everyone else, like the fans who catch every single mistake I make, or the canon. which is a constant reminder of my own inadequacy. When it comes to IPs, there's a few attitudes. Like, you either love it and want to contribute to it because you enjoy it so much, or it's simply a constant reminder of something that you could never do. And that is why you're working for them and not on your own projects, which you actually, deep down, really want to do. But those are just my thoughts. What are yours? Let me know down in the comments below. Like the video if you like the video. Subscribe. More videos like this in the future, and I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.